Good afternoon. It gives me the sincerest pleasure to introduce to you Sehoya Cotner. Sehoya is an associate professor in the Department of Biology Teaching and Learning at the University of Minnesota. She's an award-winning teacher who is passionate about both biology and biology education research. She studied teaching with technology, barriers to teaching and learning evolution, and gender disparity in sciences. She's also published many articles on strategies for engaging students in large lectures, including work with the Active Learning Classroom Project at the University of Minnesota. Her current work involves identifying which elements of course-based research experiences are key to promoting scientific literacy, identifying and encountering barriers to learning science, evolution education in the Galapagos, and facilitating meaningful group interactions in a large lecture setting. And just hot off the press, her latest paper is titled Small Group Gender Ratios Impact Biology Class Performance and Peer Evaluations. So I'll turn it over to
Thanks.
Sehoya.
Thanks a lot. Hi, you guys. It's great to be here. I have a full agenda. It'd be nice to have about 4 or 5 hours, but I'm sure if I talk really quickly and we're very efficient, I can get everything done in an hour. I am going to ask you guys to do stuff, and one thing that would be nice is if we could, we can just say, okay, stay away from these tables, and ideally we would have at least 3 people at a table. So maybe if those 2 tables could combine forces when we start doing stuff, is that okay? Right? And then you guys we're good. Okay. So I have an agenda, and what I'm going to ask you to do for a few of the items is use Poll-Ev or Poll Everywhere. You can get there when the poll is active, which I think it may be now, at pollev.com and then Sehoya Cotner 398. This can be done on a computer, a phone, anything. It's just Wi-Fi enabled. There's a million good clicker type resources or classroom response resources. I am in no way endorsing Poll-Ev over other things. This just was an easy thing to do today. I actually used TopHat in my class, but okay. So I want to talk about briefly active learning classrooms, briefly my experience, but also work towards doing a bunch of things that I do, and I do them as a somewhat lazy person who likes to do simple, easy things whenever humanly possible instead of more complicated, difficult things. And most of them, if not all, are empirically grounded, meaning there's data in support of their use in the classroom. Okay, but feel free to call me on that if you think that they otherwise. Okay, so first let's do one of these, right? This should be active, right? It is active, and it should tell us how you are feeling about teaching in the technology-enhanced active learning rooms. Fingers are crossed. Are you able to click? I believe I've started the presentation, and they are able to click. Oh my gosh, look at this. So if you look at the screens around the room, I think it's a little bit easier to see that there's a general positivity, and it's okay if there's a little bit of skepticism. So far, we don't have any of the really, really upset faces, so maybe I should quickly stop the poll. Yeah. Oh, great, great. Let's stop the poll. Are there big issues with getting on and accessing the poll?
I still can't type in the URL. I'm having trouble. Yeah. On the phone.
Oh, yeah, that's the worst. That is the worst. So there will be other opportunities, but at least we have some idea that people are relatively open. Okay. So, all right. You guys are familiar with traditional classrooms, and I know that you're about to embark on a really exciting experience with all kinds of different permutations of TEAL, or Technology-Enhanced Active Learning Classrooms. At my university, we use active learning classrooms as sort of the moniker. I mean the exact same thing. You know, sometimes people talk about scale-up classrooms, active learning, TEAL, they're all the same thing. And here is an image of ours at work in introductory biology. And so it's a similar, they're round tables. We have 9-person seating. I don't have a real strong opinion about the number of people you have to have at a table. I mean, I think it should be at a minimum 3, but you know, this has worked so far. I really am envious of your ability to look at all different kinds of setups. And we have a whole building that is dedicated largely to these rooms. It has about 19 of these active learning classrooms in different sizes, ranging from 3 tables or 27 students up to 181 students. We don't have anything like what you guys are putting in that'll take over 400 students. But it's a beautiful building. It's perched on the Mississippi River. There's a lot of natural light. It's really lovely to teach there. So if you think about why wouldn't faculty want to teach in these rooms, okay? This doesn't have to be your opinion, okay? This is a distancing thing. You can think about other faculty that you may have heard talk about this. What would be their reasons for not wanting to teach in these rooms? And what I'd like you to do is let's have an uncomfortable pause while we think about something. I know it. Okay, that felt like an hour. Now, if you can talk about it at your tables to come up with a couple of salient points that you can agree on that are significant barriers, okay? Reasons why faculty wouldn't want to teach in the rooms. And then we'll come back together and do multiple hands, multiple voices. So we'll demonstrate that in a bit. Talk about it. Go. Okay. I hear a lot of reasons. It'd be nice to know your thoughts. And what I want to do is see hands. And when I see 4 of them, then we'll get some feedback. So that's the multiple. All right? So if you've got some you are willing to share, please put a hand up. We got 1. Oh yeah, I saw you. We have 2. We have 3. We have 4. Perfect, perfect. Okay, let's start with the 4th one.
So sometimes the technology doesn't work, and then you're kind of stuck like, what do I do now?
So if it's technology enhanced is what you're going for, yeah, right. Okay, that's a thing. Fear of technology. Is that the good category?
Yes.
Concerns about it. Maybe not fear, but just like rational concerns. What were you going to say?
Yep. In our teaching first-year material science in large classes, we found the students respond very positively to using a blackboard and chalk to slow things down. And so how exactly is that going to be implemented in a room like this?
100%, I'm seeing some nods, the blackboard and chalk to slow things down, right? I agree. I use a whiteboard, same thing, right? To slow things down, okay? And we'll do some of that in a little bit, okay? What were you going to say?
Concerns with where the focus is. So for example, I wanted to be watching you, but I couldn't see the screen properly, and so I had to turn around. And so I couldn't watch you while you were speaking and look at the screen at the same time, whereas in a large lecture classroom, I can do this both. And then the other thing is similar concern, but you want to also have your little circle where you're interacting with the people at your table, but yet I found myself turning my back to the person at the table to look at the screen.
Right.
So,
right. And as I'm moving around, I mean, my back is invariably to some students, and that's a weird position. It can be a little discombobulating. Anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's kind of unfamiliar territory to faculty, and you're less in control of the narrative because discussions are happening.
Yeah.
Whereas when you are lecturing at the front of the room, you can pretty much control that with to a greater degree, I'd say, and that's more familiar.
I 100% agree that we lose some control, or a lot of control, in some of these rooms. They almost invite chaos, right?
Also, I think the students sometimes expect a more traditional teaching style, and they are not necessarily open to, unless if you were have to really prove that this is better for them, and so the stakes are higher. Right?
Oh, the stakes are higher because of student expectation. That makes sense. That makes sense too. Yeah, so all of this stuff makes sense, right? Everything you're saying, I've felt it. I know my colleagues have felt it, right? I'm convinced it's worth it. But before I go forward, I'll just say this multiple hands, multiple voices thing is for me a really good way to get students to participate who don't otherwise do so. Because if you wait and you give them time and they see other hands go up, then you'll start to see people you haven't heard from in a while. And so I think that's a really nice, simple strategy that also puts a pause in, because you're not immediately leaping on that one student who always says stuff.
I also
Okay.
like how you went backwards through the list of people, right? Because that first person's always the person in front of the class.
Yeah, that person. Okay, so I want to just say about some of the work that I did in terms of demonstrating an evidentiary basis for teaching in these rooms. This is going to be like 5-minute overlap if you were there this morning. Just 5 minutes. Check out, you do some online shopping. Okay, so I teach an introductory biology course that for our institution is relatively large enrollment. It's actually between like 800 and 1,200 students a year. It's non-majors, and I began by teaching it I did a study, or was involved in a study, where we compared active learning to traditional classrooms and tried to keep everything else the same to see if there was evidence for teaching in these sort of rooms. It's an introductory biology course that's focused on the evolution and biology of sex. And so that's a disclaimer that I always feel is warranted, but maybe it's not. I mean, it's introductory biology. That's all it is, with a lot of sex. Okay, so, and the way we did this, it was actually a replicate study. There have been several of these that have come out of our active learning initiative at the University of Minnesota. But I taught one section of the class in a traditional classroom with bolted tables and chairs, and they're all facing me, you know, the sage on the stage kind of thing. But it was a really nice traditional classroom. Okay, it was in a brand new building, that brand new building on the river that I showed you. This was the one they set up to be just your standard lecture hall. And then I taught a section in our active learning space, which is the round tables and the microphones and the whiteboards and everything all over the place. We did have a quasi-experimental design, and we use the term quasi in education studies often because we are not randomizing the students. We're basing it on the enrollment. And so, but the students didn't know which room they were going to be in when they signed up. So we tried to have the same approach to instruction. We did have the same syllabus, supplementary materials, the same exams, media, everything. We were hoping that the characteristics of the students would be the same, and they were, except for one thing. And the building, they were both in the shiny new building, so that shouldn't have changed things. The only treatment we were going for was whether it was in an active learning classroom or not. This was really difficult, right? Because you can do things in these spaces that are hard to do in a traditional classroom where the students are all lined up and bolted down. Okay, the students are not bolted down, but you know what I mean. Okay. And so this work was published in the Journal of College Science Teaching, where we kind of shared this experience, including some of the angst and problems that I had with it. Looking at the student population, there were no significant differences in any of those incoming metrics except for what we call the American College Test, the ACT. And that is an exam. It's a relatively high stakes test that we use to place students, and it ends up being highly predictive of college performance. Okay, their GPA, for instance, their retention, time to graduation, et cetera. And so the ACT scores were significantly lower in the active learning classroom by about a point. We cannot account for this. I mean, we can wave our hands about why that was, but it's just worth knowing because we want to control for that when we look at performance. Cool? So, how many points was the ACT is out of 36. So this is our non-majors general population at our university. So they're coming in at around 26. Our biology students are usually around 29 or 30.
It's like a 3% difference.
Yeah. Cool, good. So anyway, so here I want you to think about this. So if we have a hypothesis that students in the active learning classroom will outperform their peers in the traditional classroom. I mean, that you could hypothesize whatever, but I'm just giving you that one, right? Let's just say, okay, we think they're going to outperform their peers. Okay, and we've got the ACT scores as our predictor. What would the data look like in support of this hypothesis? Okay, so I want you to think about this, discuss how it will look, and then I want you to graph it at your whiteboard. And while you're figuring out, who's going to go graph it at the whiteboard, I'm going to tell you, it's going to be the person in your table with the most colorful socks. Now, if everybody's wearing black socks, go for the most colorful something else. But think about the data and take a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. This is leadership on my part. Are you about to write something on the board?
Yeah, our group is ready.
It's okay. If you guys are chosen, though, if you're chosen, pick the one around the room that best represents your sentiment. Okay, so I have the magic 8 ball, which is going to call on a group. Okay, let's see if I had an algorithm up here. So you have the person with the most colorful socks. Well, we can also just pick on them, I guess.
Fair. We're already being super fun by wearing colorful socks.
I know. This will show you. This will show you. Okay, ready? Table number 2. Is that you guys? Okay. So who can explain their graph? And people can stand up, they can walk around, they can put on binoculars, but what have you, tell us how we're looking at this.
Do we explain?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought someone else was trying to explain.
You're the chosen table.
We plotted the score versus the 2 groups, and the box are these box plots where you can represent in a visual way the distribution of the grades for each group. So with the mean, the average, the mean, the median, the maybe 10th and 19th percentile, etc. So it's kind of a way to show the distribution.
And this is great because it is a compelling illustration that they're doing better in the active learning classrooms. Does anybody think that there could be some the standard deviation you can see? They're kind of non-overlapping. So there's constructive criticism we could provide. Don't worry, table back there. We're good. No, you're awesome. I'm glad you're into it. So there's some box and whiskers around the room. One thing that is good to point out about this is the trend is great. It's definitely what I would want to see in support of my hypothesis, except I would be a little terrified that my traditional classroom was doing so badly. So that's cool. Some of you have, like for instance, compared. Here they're clearly saying it's adjusted for ACT score, and some of you have actually put it on a sort of a trajectory of ACT scores. So we see that over here, maybe a little bit over there. Did you guys put yours on an ACT trajectory? No.
Just distribution.
That was a distribution curve, yeah. So one thing that's cool about this, though, is if you look around the room, there's a lot of acceptable ways of presenting data that would be in support of this hypothesis, right? And we can certainly find holes in it, and we could talk about that all day. This one activity we really could take a class for, but I'm not going to do that. I will say that I do love sending people to the whiteboard to graph things. I think that works out well. Here's our data. So what we have is the traditional classroom in 2 columns at left, and the active learning classroom 2 columns at right. And what we see is based on their expected grade, and we can generate an expected grade based on ACT because we have tens of thousands of data points that have told us what it will be. the active learning students were outperforming expectations significantly in a way that those in the traditional classroom were not. And this is a theme that has persisted. We published this twice, and then of course there's a limit to how many times you can publish replicates, but we see this in a lot of different contexts with a lot of different students. Shoot.
You said expected grade based on the ACT because you've got some sort of a regression.
Yes.
So you're actually saying that there's two different pools.
Two different pools.
Students,
Of
yes.
students.
Yes,
there's the
yes,
active learning
yes,
classrooms,
exactly,
students.
exactly. It's not like, for instance, repeated measures, right? They're completely separate pools, yeah, yeah. So there's definitely different ways you could have represented it. And it could be that just the outcomes of the regression itself would be more compelling for a lot of audiences. Like, as you guys know, it depends on your discipline how the data are presented. And so we definitely were very thorough with the outcomes of our regression table to help assuage any concerns about that. Go.
To be clear, in your non-active learning classroom, were you trying to do group discussion activities?
I was trying to do every single thing the same, even tell the same really dumb jokes. It was really painful. So yeah, everything the same. So for instance, whiteboard activities, I brought in a stack of little portable whiteboards and distributed them around the room so that they would be doing whiteboard activities. It was awful.
And is this drop significant for the regular classroom?
No, oh no, no it's not. There's such a range, you know, in how the students perform. We did not see that's not a significant drop. I certainly hope it wouldn't become significant if we had a lot more students. So yeah, you had your hand up.
I'm just trying to understand this data.
Yeah.
The way it looks to me anyways is that the students going into the active learning have low expectations of their success because they're going into an active learning setting. So
It's not,
I'm so glad you asked. Explain.
it's not a survey of the students and what grade they expect. It's a regression based on the ACT scores. So they know from history exactly what score a student is likely to get based on the ACT score they have coming into university. ACT is pretty good at that.
Too good.
The expected grade based on their ACT score.
Yes.
But I thought the grades that you know the grades and they're not that different.
So I think one thing that probably is being revealed by the discussion is that I screwed up by not actually just sharing the regression with you ahead of time. Like, I should have taken a pause, shown the regression model that we use to predict their grades. And then what we did was we came up with an expected grade and an actual, and that's what we graphed. So, yeah. And you know what? Probably most of the time when I present these data, it's in the States where everybody's like, oh, the ACT. I know exactly what that is. I know exactly what it means. But I know that's not something you guys have here. And it's a test that, the good thing about it in the States is that education varies wildly by state. I mean, and which state you're born into basically determines your potential for literacy, et cetera. You know, it's just really ridiculous. But the ACT is at least a standardized metric we can use. Like, we couldn't use high school grades, for instance, to predict how students would do. It has to be something standardized.
But there was only 1 point difference in ACT, so I don't understand like, why is it so showing so like.
This is a significant difference, right?
Yeah, statistically significant.
Oh, the 1 point ACT score and the actual performance in the class is not going to be percent to percent because they're different scaled items.
Okay, so this is kind of scaled to exaggerate all of the differences, I guess.
So probably what we should do
I mean, statistically significant.
is I'm going to off-source, I'm going to stop talking about this article and ask you to please look at it and let me know if there's questions and stuff.
I'll read that.
Please do, please do.
When you replicated it, did you have a better luck in having two groups where the ACT scores were the same?
I will show you. Well, actually, no, I'm not talking about this. Yes, there was a flipped classroom actually where we did something similar to this, and the ACT scores were on par, and we showed that by stripping class time to have interactive engagement, we had no significant difference and no significant incoming potential. So the ACT scores were the same. This is an anomaly And if I had to do some waving hands conjecture why we saw that ACT difference, it'd be time of day. One of the classes was offered at 9:45 in the morning, the brutal crack of dawn for our students. Who can be expected to be up that early? And then the other one was at 11:15. And I think there may be something going on there, but I can't attribute that to anything. And we don't go down that direction in the paper.
Which one was the early class?
The lower ACT score was the later class. Yeah. Okay, so I want to not, that was an illustration of how we can do data and have a discussion, and it was awesome. It was great. If my students did that kind of stuff, I would be just in heaven. But let me just tell you that when I did start in these classes, it was awful because I walked in and I just kind of had this feeling that the students would walk in and they'd be in these tables and they'd be like, oh, and they'd immediately like glom together and it would just be a buzz with productivity and scholarship. And that is not what happened because, of course, it was new to the students and they were looking at me like, what's going to happen here? What do we do? And the expectations of me were greater because it was novel. And so they expected that I would know what I was doing. And that ended up being hilarious because I did not. And so the first couple of weeks were really, really awful. And I will say, and the reason why I do this Slacker's Guide thing with what I think is super easy stuff is because I was trying to do all kinds of really complicated things, right? And so instead of the super easy, like go to the board, do a clicker, think, pair, share, multiple hands, multiple voices, the person who, blah, 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 I was doing like games and puzzles and case studies and things that are awesome, but you don't have to do all that really complicated stuff all at once, you know? Hopefully you'll have decades that you can, you know, experiment with fun new toys in the classroom. I will say it got better really quickly. So by the end of that first semester, I was in love with these rooms. And I did learn that the activities don't have to be that sophisticated. Shoot.
Was this while the study was going on, or is this before you did the study?
While the study was going on.
Okay.
While the study was going on.
So the study was your first experience doing this kind of class?
Yeah, you're finding all kinds of problems with my study, aren't you? Thank God it's already published.
I think that's supportive of this.
Well, I mean, to be honest, it's a good thing we did it then, because after that experience, I'd rather, you know, have you stick a hot poker in my eye than go back in the traditional classroom. I mean, I was done. I was done by the end of the semester. But I have to be honest and say the end of that first week, I literally, and I cry about twice a year, I'm not a big crier, I went home and cried because I hated it so much. And I was like, I feel like a bad teacher. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Like my whole identity was being a good teacher, and all of a sudden that was out the door. I sucked. And so it was really hard at first. And I think, again, because of this idea of trying to do all kinds of fancy stuff for the first time in a new environment, right? And I would definitely discourage you from doing that. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so we've already done a lot of this. We've already done a personal response thing. You know, there's all kinds of them out there, and they don't even have to be electronic. We've done think group or think pair share. This pretty much always works. Random calling. I use this in-house thing, the 8-ball that somebody developed. There's tons of random calling apps. Multiple hands, multiple voices, I think is really good. It pauses you, and you get multiple voices. Pick the person who is a great way to hear from people you wouldn't otherwise hear from. And the feedback on that from my students has been really positive. Yeah?
What's pick the person who?
So it was pick the person who has the most colorful socks. I've got a couple others I'll throw out there. I will say that in the beginning, I was not very creative about the ideas I came up with on the spot, and they ended up really selecting for privilege. Like I did one, pick the person who traveled the farthest over spring break. You know, those people may already be plenty confident and happy to talk in class. So that really wasn't what I was going for. And so I've tried to have a little, you know, a list of ideas that I can draw on because it's hard to think of on the spot. And whiteboard activities. I would say these are low-hanging fruit. Minimal prep, mostly work all the time. So I want to ramp it up with using all 4 of these in one thing. Let's see how it goes. So I know you're not all biologists. Some of you, Michelle, are going to be at an advantage. But hopefully you've all discussed evolution, because this is Canada, not the US. And maybe have talked about, natural selection, etc. But if you haven't, I'm just going to tell you what it is in 2 seconds. It's this. So natural selection is you have a population that's got some variability. You have differential reproduction. Presumably, if some of that differential reproduction is due to variability, and if some of that variability is inherited, then you have adaptive evolutionary change. Cool? That's all it is. It's just those things. And there's a pretty little picture of a bird eating some bugs, presumably because they blend in with the environment or they don't. Okay? The simplest idea in all of science. I would argue people are always like, oh, gravity is so simple, but it isn't, right? I would say this is the simplest one. Okay, so we're going to do students versus M&Ms to illustrate and hopefully unravel some misconceptions about natural selection. Because even though it is the simplest idea, there's some misconceptions that are pervasive and can get in the way of us moving forward. Now you guys are being my students. Did you catch the switch? Okay, you're my students. All right. So what I want you to do is, this will require erasing, which I think we can do, and setting up a table on your whiteboard. We're going to collect some data, okay? And this one, I don't care who goes to the board. Anybody, nominate, pick the short straw. I don't care. But send somebody to the board from each table, and I know that means some of the boards are going to have a couple of graphs. So put these in there, and then we're going to go. This should take you 1 minute or less. Go, go. Yeah, running. Running is good. Okay, so you have a habitat. Every table is my bad. Sorry.
We're good.
Sorry, my fault. Every table has a habitat. Do you have a habitat? Don't do anything with those M&Ms. Are you sorting them?
We already counted.
What is with you guys?
To sort them with this table.
So this is a human imperative, is to sort things. Okay, wait. You have a habitat. This is awesome. I love the chaos. We are going to randomly select a population. Now, how can we possibly randomly select a population? Somebody at the table needs to police the randomly selecting person, who presumably is going to have their eyes closed or be looking away. 16 M&Ms. Randomly. Now, the next activity is going to be timed. Oh, not this one. Although I do ask you to be a little speedy. Record your color frequency, and to be honest, don't do a percent, just do absolute numbers, because we're going to stick with the same population size. So if you have 2 browns, put 2 in generation 1 brown. This should take 30 seconds. Now, we're going to have a predation event, but it's going to be quick. So here's the deal. You guys might be predators, but you're also prey. So when you're snacking, you have to go really, really quickly and just remove 8 that stand out on the background, and you have 5 seconds. Go. 5, 4, 3. The 8 that stand out, just 8. So now we are going to have a reproduction event, and here's the simple thing. In M&Ms, oh my gosh, with the sorting, you guys, this is killing me. Do not sort them. So color is 100% heritable, which means if you have 2 greens now left, you're going to have 4 greens in your next population. So add 2 greens. See what I'm saying? And so after you reproduce, then update generation 2.
So what if
Do you guys kind of have the hang of this now?
Yeah, I think so.
So basically there's a predation event that's quick, and you're grabbing quickly the ones that stand out. Then they're going to reproduce asexually with 100% inheritance for color. This isn't contrived at all. And then we'll record our third generation. Can we do all that really quickly? Go. And then we'll have a little discussion. Go, 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 go. So I want to talk right now. I want to bring you guys together and ask a question. This table started off with 1 brown, 1 green, 3 yellow, 3 orange, 4 red, and 4 blue, and ended up with 16 red. If you had to guess something about their habitat, what would you say? Red. It's red. Okay, so all this stuff is coming together. There's a million things we could point out, and really it would probably only work for the biologists in the room. One of the things that, though, is a really great point that I get to, that I typically can illustrate is that students will, for instance, have a blue background and no blue M&Ms. And so then I can ask the question, why are there no blue M&Ms? I would have anticipated 16 blue M&Ms at the end of this. And then they get to say, because we didn't have any to start with. And just saying that right now, I have goosebumps because it gives me chills when they realize this is a fundamental misconception about evolution, which is that things can just arise on demand, right? If that were the case, I wouldn't need to wear sunscreen, right? I would have melanin and I could just go outside, you know, and I wouldn't worry about my lung surfactants and I could smoke cigarettes all the time because I could just get the mutations I want, right? And that's not how it works. And so it's a really nice point. And I can do all kinds of other illustrations with this that are biologically relevant, and so I'm not going to keep talking about it. This is just one example of a manipulable. So, but I'm going to ask you, I want to tie it together because we've done whiteboards, we've done some activity. I want to ask you, what happened to M&M diversity during this activity? So you should be able to click on one of those options. And then feel free to like eat all your M&Ms or throw them in the baggie if you don't want them. I don't ever need them again. And I will just say also from a biologist standpoint, this is really beautiful because they don't get, that's another misconception, is that natural selection somehow increases diversity, and it really doesn't. It culls, it strips diversity, right? And so it allows me to say, okay, where does the increase in diversity come from? And they get to figure out that it's mutations, and for the purposes of my class, they get to figure out sex is really important as well. So there's a lot of outcomes that are revealed by this little activity. So great. So then the next thing I could do, and I'm not going to stop here, but I'm not going to stop, I'll just give you an example, is then I could follow it up with what I really want as my take-home message, have them explain, magic 8 ball, etc. We cool? Okay. So I did have this set up, but I'm not going to do it because I am concerned about time. Pick the person who grew up the farthest away from Toronto, blah, blah, blah. And then I just wanted to summarize some ramping it up things that could be done. There's a lot of group activities. I've used concept maps, I think, in most of our disciplines, all of our disciplines. We probably have concepts that we teach almost in silos or in chunks, but we really want them to be integrated somehow. And so for me, using concept maps has been a good way to do that. So for instance, I have, like maybe a prompt question, like how do mutations and natural selection contribute to the evolution of body size in gorillas? Okay. And then I give them a list of concepts. I give them a way of organizing it. They can do all this themselves. And then I ask them to pull this together using arrows of association. And there's a lot of tools they can use. They can just use PowerPoint, like online, Google Slides, whatever. There's an app, CMaps, that they can use to construct concept maps in their groups online. I give them time to work on it in tables, and then we show their products on the LCD screens. And so this is a really nice example of one that shows these associations. I also really like them doing small projects and then sharing poster sessions, like take a one slide poster to deliver the outcome of what they just did. So In our sex class, we do a couple-week project where they test hypotheses that they generate about human mating preferences using online personals ads. And it's a really great activity. I mean, I try to have them be somehow biologically or evolutionarily relevant. And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. And then we have a poster session at the end of the day. So here is an example. The one on the left, their question was on Tinder, where you swipe right if you like somebody. Are you more likely to get right swipes if you have a puppy in your picture? Okay, so, you know, and then they did a nice angle about nurturing and future parenting potential and everything. So that was great. So they showed these poster sessions. They show these posters. I have the students walk around the room and look, and then they vote on things like, in this case, the most interesting data. And you can generate heat maps with the clickers. They're hardly ever this clear, right? I mean, they loved those two posters. Those aren't necessarily the ones I just showed you. This is just an example of a heat map that we generated. This is 100 plus students voting. So that's pretty impressive. And then there's some smart asses who are clicking on me. All right. So we've looked at a bunch of these things, and I've got one more thing I want to ask you guys to do. Can we do that? Can we do one more tiny thing? Personal response things, blah, 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 pick the person who, whiteboard activities. And then I just threw in manipulables. Strip sequences are something I didn't talk about, but depending on your discipline, you may have things that are sequential, and intuiting the sequence makes sense. So for me, it might be like timeline of important events in Earth, you know? Like for instance, you couldn't have aerobic organisms until you had cyanobacteria generate a whole bunch of oxygen. You know, so they have to kind of put these things in order in a logical way. And puzzles, there's a lot of different ways I use puzzles. Concept maps, poster sessions, clicker cases where you have actual case studies that they work through. A lot of those have been developed at the University of Buffalo. I think that's the right, yeah. There's a whole clicker, there's a case study institute, and they provide all the resources, including like PowerPoints or PDFs, worksheets, and clicker questions. It's kind of crazy. And so I want to do one last thing. And this is, think about 3 instructions for your future selves. And I have a list that I'll share too. For your future selves to guide future work in the teal spaces. So if you know you're going there, if you might go there. So some things we talked about. And you can write them down or not. In the interest of time, maybe I'll just have you pick your favorite one or two. So think about it for a second. Uncomfortable pause while you guys are thinking. And it's okay if it's something you saw today and you're kind of like, well, that's definitely a bad idea, and here's how I will do it differently and better. It's totally fine, right? And then what I'd like you to do, and this is going to be crazy for us on our phones because, you know, it's actually typing words, give your future self some advice, and then once we get some of these, you can like what your peers say, and we can upvote and come up with, you know, some nice overarching recommendations. And then I have my own list that I kind of draw from when I'm teaching. So after you've entered 1 or 2, if you want, go ahead and see if there's ones you like. I think it's obvious how to upvote them. Maybe not. Awesome. It is obvious. Yay. Please do eat the manipulable. It's a good thing I didn't bring pipe cleaners for meiosis today, because that would have been kind of gross. that? You misspelled colorful. That's awesome. So why don't we take like, just 10 more seconds.
It's kind of a little clumsy on the phone.
Is it? Yeah, I could see that. The scrolling function may be hard. So then what I would like to do is I'll share kind of a list I generated based on, well, a lot of mistakes. Oh, this is great. Okay. And that is, people have various opinions about this, and we don't have time to argue it, so luckily I can just throw it out there and you can then leave. I never let my students self-assort. Never. I always assign. And I have a whole bunch of reasons for that, including for the fact that after it's all said and done, 95% of students polled say they would rather be assigned a seat. One of the problems I have is I invariably have students they will self-assort positively and phenotypically, right? And that just leads to problems, and it's just not as fun. And I want it to be about the content and not like some kind of popularity context, or am I in the pretty group? Can I go to the pretty group? Or am I with the jocks? Or am I with the international students? I would have people do something in the first few minutes, if not seconds, of class to set the stage. Skip all that intro, here's who I am. You got tons of time for that. You can do that after an hour, right? And I would work on group dynamics right away. So I didn't do any of that today because you guys are awesome. But you can imagine there's people who get, ignored, or there's people who dominate the class or something like that. I think kind of setting the stage for what's expected is good. In this class, I don't think it's necessary, but if you're in that big classroom, for instance, I would set a microphone standard early, because the first person who talks may be plenty loud, but then, oh no, you've not picked on that person to use the microphone, and the next person is really quiet, and you're nervous about picking on them. I would just say, use the microphone, right? And everybody in the class will appreciate it. You may be able to hear the students, but if they're behind the speaker, they won't. I really share data early. Like when we first start doing stuff, I say, here's why. And I show them some of my own data and from other classes about active learning, about group work. I have them click on what do employers value the most in future employees. And I give them a list of options. And they know it, is the ability to work with groups and to work with other people. They already know that's what people are looking for. And then I like these easy assessment techniques. There's a paper by Kim Tanner called 21 Strategies for Easy In-Class Assessments. I pointed to Michelle because we were just talking about Kim Tanner. That's really good. It's just a list of things like multiple hands, multiple voices, think, pair, share, etc. It's golden. And it's really it's a paper, but it's really a list. And I put Be Strong in here. For me, the hardest one in the beginning, and maybe for any of you guys, I don't know, is waiting. Like if nobody says something, and waiting for people to decide to go to the board and draw stuff or whatever. The waiting is really, really hard in the beginning. And so I'm just trying to get, I would say be strong about the waiting because it's good for them. And like you mentioned in the beginning, the pause that you get from the chalkboard, giving the pause is a good thing, right? It's most of the time that's going to be a good thing. So this was my kind of takeaway that people can, obviously, reasonable people can disagree. We don't have time, really, do we? Does anybody have any burning questions? And obviously, I understand if people need to get up and go. It's Friday. Burning questions, yeah.
I just quickly looked up the paper that you mentioned right now, and it's a great resource. And I was just wondering, are there other resources you can suggest that have good activities that we might use as models?
There are. Is there a way I can maybe provide some resources to you and you could make them available? Because it's hard, like off the top of my head to think. But every single paper I've ever written. No. But there's that. There are some that talk about effective clicker strategies. Like for instance, there's a limited utility to just multiple choice questions to gauge basic knowledge. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. Like sometimes you're just keeping people awake, right? And I don't think that's a problem. I like to start class with a couple of clicker questions, but there are some papers that talk about more effective strategies for engaging students if you're using polling, which I think are good. But I'd be happy to let me think of some things that come to me and share them with Deep, and then he could maybe share those throughout. Yeah, Kim Tanner's done. I mean, like pretty much everything she produces is great, though. Tanner is Tanner, and it's an open access journal, Life Sciences Education. And so yeah, Kimberly Tanner, and it's like 21 strategies, boom, and it's easy to find. Yeah, thanks for asking that, though. I'm glad you're looking at that. Anything else before we wrap up? You guys were awesome. This was really great. If any of you are like super sweet and feel like ending your week being nice, it would be great to erase the boards. And I will go around and collect the markers. And let me know if you have questions. You have my email as well. It's easy. I'm the only Sehoya at umn.edu. So thanks.